Hello, and welcome to New Beginnings Start Today, the podcast for people who want to grow deeper in their faith in the Lord. I'm your host, Dr. Douglas Keffer, a minister, clinical pastoral counselor here in Roanoke, Virginia, and I have a passion for helping people live their faith. Today we will talk about calming the storms of life, and how you can calm the stresses and struggles that you face in life, that you face every day. Let's begin. As we all face the storms of life at one time or another, how we have dealt with those storms determine the outcome of what we are facing. The same is true for those who are facing storms right now in your lives. I want to help you learn how to really handle your storms, to where you can find strength because of putting your trust in the one who can calm those storms for you, Jesus Christ. We find an incident in the Gospel of Mark about how his disciples were fearing for their very lives because of a sudden storm that arose on the Sea of Galilee. Listen to what was happening. Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us! We're going to drown." He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Mark the 8th chapter, verses 23 through 27. Before we go any further, there is one thing that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to believe that what I just read to you actually happened in the life of Jesus and his disciples. And it's just not a nice little story that was written to help people cope with the storms that come up in their lives. You see, I believe everything that is written in the Bible to be true, from Genesis to Revelation. So what is recorded here in Mark 8 has tremendous truths for us today, as we see so many people struggling with storms that seem to be so difficult that they believe we're going to drown. I'm thinking of a young lady that I counseled and her family, whose circumstances became very difficult. She came into session and told me that she was pregnant and didn't know if she wanted to keep the child as she was so young. Her mother was committed to raising the baby herself, and that she wanted her daughter to have the baby. I begged her to have the baby, and if she didn't want to see or to raise that baby, or her mother to raise the baby, because it would just be too hard to see that child constantly, and on top of that, being raised in her home by her mom, she could put that child up for adoption. This storm was too much for this young girl, and she saw no other option for many reasons, and decided to have an abortion at Planned Parenthood. She lives with the outcome of that storm every day, and she has grown in her faith to where she now knows that Jesus would have calmed the storm in her life, in her heart, in her mind, if she would have just trusted him a little more. Then I think of a young man who came to see me, whose mother referred him to me because his storm was alcohol. He lived with an inferiority complex because of not believing that he could live up to his parents' expectations for him. Most mornings his mother would call him to see if he would answer her at his apartment. Many mornings he did not. So Dad got in his vehicle, drove over to the apartment, and found his son passed out from drinking so much. They tried to help their son with this addiction by sending him to some of the finest treatment centers in the country. I saw them in a store, and they told me that their son had died from alcohol poisoning, finding him on the floor of his apartment where he had drunk himself to death. I remember him talking to me in his sessions of how he appreciated my counsel of how the Lord would help him with this addiction if he would let him. There is so much of this kind of heartache that so many people are having to deal with. I want us to look at several aspects of the storms of life. First, storms can come quickly and can be intense. Look at what Mark tells us is happening as his disciples with his disciples as Jesus and they were in the boat. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. Verse 24. This kind of storm of the sea on the Sea of Galilee was not uncommon. The wind would come down over the mountainside and sweep across the water, causing large waves. This was such a storm as they were in. This can happen in our lives today as well. One minute everything seems to be fine, and in the next minute we can find that life circumstances are overtaking us. It's when the phone rings while you are watching a movie, and you answer the phone and you get the news that your teenage son had been in a car accident and is critically injured and is on the way to your local hospital. You jump in your car and race to the hospital and pray that your son will be okay. This happened suddenly. Secondly, storms bring fears. Mark tells us what the disciples did because they feared for their lives. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." Verse 25. The parents of their son who was in the car accident had all kinds of fears as they rushed to the hospital. Is our son still alive? Are we going to get there quickly enough to see him before he goes into surgery, or worse, before he dies? What are we actually going to see when we get there? We'll be able to talk to him or hear us tell him that we love him. Is he going to be okay? Was anyone else hurt? And will they be okay? What about their families and them finding out this horrific news? Can we hold it together for him so he will see us strong? These are all normal fears that we can have when something intense happens in our lives. Thirdly, storms tests our faith. Mark tells us what Jesus said to these men he loved. He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Verse 26. This is where things get really tricky for us. We want to say that we live by faith, but when faced with the intensity of a critical situation, do we really call upon our faith, or are we more likely to become unraveled and start doubting that things can be okay in the midst of such a storm? I would hope that these parents would believe that whatever they found arriving at the hospital, and whatever condition they found their son in, that their faith in the Lord would allow them to believe that Jesus would rebuke the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. I have seen this kind of faith when called to the hospital as the family's minister, and saw God's glory at work. But not always was there a wonderful outcome. But the family knew that they were in the care of their master. Fourthly, storms have to obey Jesus. That's right. The longer I live, the more I believe this truth. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Verse 27. When is the last time that you were amazed at what you saw happen in the midst of an intense storm in your life? Again, I would hope that these parents would be able to believe and to know that what they found when they found arriving at the hospital and being told about the accident by the police that were on the scene, that they were amazed at what happened. They were told by the police, "It is a miracle that your son is still alive because of how mingled his car was when we arrived." This is exactly what Jesus can do with the storms that come up in our lives, and we fear for our very existence. What storms are you dealing with today? I bet it's a doozy. I bet they can be a doozy. But then you can look at what Mark shares with us that happened to these men and know that Jesus can speak to the winds and the waves, and complete calmness can happen to you. We have to learn to live by this kind of faith in order to be able to trust that Jesus is in control of the storms in our lives. And we will get through those storms, and he will save us from the fears and the doubts that intense storms can produce. Remember, the men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Verse 27. The man is Jesus, our Savior. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I want to invite you to contact me and share how you find trust that when all of these storms arise in your life, that you're waiting to hear Jesus say that everything is going to be okay. And in that trust, you find calmness, you find peace, you find resolve. If you're seeing this on YouTube, please check the subscribe button and the like button. And also click on the share button and share it with all your friends. That will be so helpful to me. Tell me about other issues that you would like me to discuss by leaving your comments. And you can reach me at drdouglaskeffer@gmail.com. Until next time, God bless each of you.